2 people in 3 weeks is absolutely ridiculous.
This is Today as It Happened. Good Tuesday evening to you. I'm Holly Furfer, here with your chronological look at the biggest events and stories of the day. From the ongoing anti-ICE protests following the killing of a Minnesota man by a federal agent, to a hearing over the deadly midair aviation crash above the Potomac last year. But first this morning, Scripps News business and tech correspondent Maura Barrett gave us a look at where things stand for the new ownership of TikTok as the popular social media app unveils new terms of service. It's been just under a week since TikTok's joint venture was finalized, unveiling new terms of service. And for the last several days, TikTok creators have been sounding the alarm, saying views and engagement have mysteriously plunged. Scripps News business and tech correspondent Maura Barrett live in Denver for us on this. And Maura, how widespread are these issues and what does TikTok say is going on?
Well, Holly, if you're like me and have been scrolling through any form of social media over the last couple of days, you'll see a lot of creators posting that the videos they're posting on Instagram or Facebook, for example, are not getting engagement or tracking any views over on TikTok. And a lot of this, these creators are observing, they're saying has been tied to videos or content they're posting in relation to Minnesota or talking about ICE and how violent actions have been happening in Minnesota there with the federal agency. And so there's a lot of speculation among these largely progressive creators talking about how they feel their content on TikTok is being suppressed. This also comes in tandem with the fact that TikTok's joint venture, the U.S. joint venture, just finalized on Thursday, and a lot of changes happened in that sense. And so, again, a lot of speculation that these two things are linked, a lot of speculation that this is by design, that TikTok is purposely doing this. Now, I should say I've gone back and forth with my sources at TikTok over the past couple of days to clarify this, because the first response I got from TikTok was that these videos were having trouble uploading, were having trouble getting recommended to folks on the FYP page and getting traction because over the weekend, one of their data center partners, which houses a lot of their key infrastructure, was facing a power outage. Now, they didn't give any insight on where that data center was and what exactly other than these impacts were affected. Now, I did just get an update from TikTok and refreshing. They posted saying that we've made significant progress in recovering our U.S. infrastructure with our U.S. data center partner. However, the U.S. user experience may still have some technical issues, including when posting new content. So this may be poor timing on TikTok's part when it comes to the joint venture and the power outage, and not necessarily a political targeting issue, though we have seen in the past certain topics definitely have been muted or not shared as much. And so that's where a lot of the speculation about these political topics is coming up. But in terms of what we know on the official side, TikTok, as much as I've pushed back saying, this is the speculation we're seeing, they say any of these tech issues is really tied to that power outage, Holly.
And Maura, we know that there's also a backlash over the changes in terms of service. What do those look like?
Yeah, so anytime there's new management or like what we've seen with this joint venture, they have to update their terms of service. This is something TikTok told me they were going to do last week when the deal was finalized. A lot of the algorithm going to be trained more on U.S.-centric data, right? The thing is, a lot of people, because they were skeptical of this potential new management, actually took the time and read through the terms of service, and they were alarmed to see that TikTok is tracking items like immigration status, religious affiliation, race, gender identity, and medical diagnoses. However, I went back and looked at the terms of service as of December of 2025. Those elements were previously in the terms of service. It's just likely that people might not have been reading those incremental updates. Instead, they went through and read the new terms of service that still included a lot of those elements. When you log into the app for the first time after the joint venture, it prompted you to accept those terms of service. That's when people maybe went in and actually read it and were shocked to see that included. I will say the big change that I've noticed in reviewing the two different versions of the terms of service is the fact that TikTok is now admitting that it will collect precise location data unless you've opted out. So that's something that users might want to look into. I did talk with a tech policy expert this morning asking if this tracks with other social media platforms in terms of their terms of service. I'm going to hear a bit of our conversation in terms of how these agreements compare.
Once there's kind of an insinuation of doubt about, ownership and conflicts of interest, those kinds of questions, then I think people will kind of put two and two together and get three and attribute whatever changes they see to some sort of politically motivated, ideology. And I think we are in a very charged moment right now.
And so the key thing that Sarah Scripps and I talked about was whether this is a one-time incident within a week of the joint venture launching, partnered up with the tragedy that happened over the weekend. And she said, well, we're going to need to watch for is if this becomes a pattern. Will we see videos conveniently glitch and not upload after other politically charged moments? But at this point in time, she said, given the fact that we saw 200 million people across the country impacted by this massive storm, the power outage excuse from TikTok is not unlikely. And so she said, let's take the explanation for what it is. If this becomes a larger pattern and becomes a larger issue, that's when we can dig in and ask more specific questions about these politically charged statements. Holly.
The cross-country winter storm has passed, but for some, trouble is just beginning. Over 250 million people are under cold alerts for frigid temperatures that will linger for days, raising fears for those without shelter or power. Scripps News national correspondent Tony Waterman is live in chilly Washington, D.C. Tony, what's the temperature there right now as you're standing outside?
Well, it's about in the mid-20s right now, but I have to tell you, with that sun beaming down, it feels quite comfortable. It could be the leg warmers and the fleece pants I'm wearing as well. But these temperatures are going to be sticking around here for at least another week. But the real concern are those places that are now without power. More than 550,000 homes and businesses still do not have power at this point, mostly in Louisiana, up and through Mississippi and into Tennessee. And you have some counties like Lafayette County in Mississippi where upwards of 70–80% of residents still do not have power in these very, very cold temperatures there in some places hitting record lows. We're talking about the low 20s, and the houses in Louisiana and Tennessee and Mississippi, they are just not built to withstand that type of prolonged cold without any sort of heat coming in. The energy providers across that region say they really are racing to try to get the lights turned back on, but say that it could take a couple of more days, if not into early February. And that is because of the extensive damage that has been done to the power infrastructure in that area. You had this mass accumulation of ice and snow hanging on those power lines, just snapping them like twigs. And that is going to take quite a long time to restore. And with these temperatures remaining very, very much below freezing, it sets up this dangerous situation for individuals. We've already seen at least 14 deaths from this storm attributed to hypothermia or exposure to these very cold temperatures, including 8 individuals who died in New York City alone. And officials are just really trying to encourage people to seek shelter wherever they can until the temperature either rises again or the power is restored.
Let me ask you about another cold snap that's expected to sweep across the country later this week. I mean, not what many of us want to hear, but what do we know about what's expected to come?
Yeah, this might not just be really cold, Arctic, bitter temperatures. This may also be more snow coming weekend, mostly up the entire eastern seaboard. In fact, you have some meteorologists in New York City saying the storm this past weekend is going to be nothing compared to what we may see this coming weekend. The National Weather Service making it very clear that the models are still very early at this point, so things could change. But what they are seeing is that there is going to be this low pressure system that is forming forming off the southeastern coast very rapidly. It's going to bring these big gusts of wind, and as it moves up to the mid-Atlantic, it could bring, or it's expected to bring, heavy precipitation. The question right now is what form that precipitation is going to take. Is it going to be snow? Is it going to be rain? Or is it going to be some nasty mixture of the two in the form of sleet? That is unknown. But things are going to remain very cold for many more days, with potentially more snow in the forecast this coming weekend. So anybody that has their shovel out, don't put it away quite yet. You might need it this coming weekend.
We'll be back in just a moment as we continue tracking today's top news. Welcome back to Today As It Happened. Let's check back in on our daily briefing of today's top stories. Political backlash is growing after a Border Patrol agent shot and killed ICU nurse Alex Pretty in Minnesota. Democrat John Fetterman is now calling on President Trump to fire Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. Noem came under fire after she labeled Pretty a domestic terrorist hours after the shooting Saturday, but failed to provide more details about the incident and the investigation. Scripps News congressional correspondent Nathaniel Reed live on Capitol Hill for us. And Nate, what is at risk if the government, let me go back to talk about Kristi Noem. What is John Fetterman saying about all of this? And could this prevent them from coming to an agreement? Because we know Friday there's a government shutdown. Could they say, look, we're not going to go along with keeping the government open until you make some changes, namely Kristi Noem?
Yeah, look, I mean, the vast majority of Democrats on Capitol Hill appear to have coalesced around the idea of firing Kristi Noem or impeaching her, at least in the House of Representatives, where there's been over 100 Democrats who have now called for her impeachment. To be clear, not a whole lot expected in that department. Republicans are still in the majority in Congress. But look, as we see an increasing number of Democrats here on Capitol Hill talking about the possibility of President Trump removing Kristi Noem, it almost begs the question if removing Secretary Noem could potentially make it easier to reach some sort of agreement to fund the federal government by this Friday. Now, again, Holly, a government shutdown would occur this Friday at midnight into Saturday if there is no action taken. Right now, the Senate is expected to pass 6 bills this week, or at least they're required to pass 6 bills this week to prevent that government shutdown from happening. One of those bills, though, the Department of Homeland Security funding bill, which includes ICE. So far, since the shooting over the weekend, we've seen Democrats lining up saying that they will not support the funding package if it includes funding for the Department of Homeland Security. A lot of frustration with the Trump administration for its handling. So at this point, it's not really clear that the Trump administration's decision to both remove Border Patrol agent at large Gregory Bovino and put in place Tom Homan in Minneapolis has really yielded any sea change among Democrats on Capitol Hill, who still appear extremely wary about giving the Trump administration any more funds for the Department of Homeland Security without some major policy changes. Now, the decision of Senator John Fetterman to call on Kristi Noem to resign, certainly notable. He ran, apparently as a progressive candidate. He's been more of a moderate up here on Capitol Hill. He's often sided with Republicans on a number of key issues, sometimes surprising his Democratic colleagues. That being said, the decision for him to call on Kristi Noem to step down, certainly notable here, as it just shows you how unified Democrats are in their messaging about their desire for Noem to step aside. Again, a lot of questions about whether the Senate Republicans will be willing to change that funding package, whether they'd be willing to separate 5 of those 6 bills, which are not the Homeland Security bill, and pass those without the Homeland Security bill. At this point, that seems unlikely at best, meaning that there would be a pretty widespread government shutdown over the weekend. Not a complete government shutdown, but about half of the government funding bills that need to pass could potentially go without passing, which would be, certainly have a lot of repercussions across Washington and the rest of the country. That being said, it does not seem like, Democrats are going to let up on their push for Noem to resign A lot of questions about whether the Trump administration would allow that to happen, and just the kind of message that that could potentially send as President Trump looks to project victory with his push on trying to crack down on people who are in this country illegally and on illegal immigration.
And Nate, let me ask you about bipartisan support here, because we know Democrats are calling for Kristi Noem to step down or for President Trump to fire her. But what about Republicans? Because it is pretty obvious what she said about the killing of Alex Preddy did not match what the video showed us. She was caught in a lie and never really backtracked that. And everybody's saying, listen, you're saying one thing, but we're seeing something else. So what have been the responses from the Republicans?
Yeah, Senator John Curtis, the Republican from Utah, saying that he, disagreed with Kristi Noem's decision to rush to judgment on this one. There's been a handful of Republican senators who say that they want an independent investigation of what happened in Minneapolis. And at this point, the calls on Noem are not going a lot further than that, just that they want an independent investigation. They want the Trump administration to take this seriously. There's certainly a lot of concerns at play. The concern of the Second Amendment issue, was this someone who was, as the, key Trump administration officials have said in the past, was, looking to massacre law enforcement, or was this someone who just happened to be carrying a legally licensed gun with them while protesting in Minneapolis? We've got First and Second Amendment issues at play here, along with a whole number of others. So certainly there are some Republicans who want a full investigation. There are none at this point that have called on Kristi Noem to resign, but certainly a lot of questions about what's going on behind the scenes. There was a report yesterday from the Wall Street Journal that among other Republican senators, it was Senator Lindsey Graham, the Republican from South Carolina, who called President Trump, called the White House over the weekend and told them that this was potentially hurting their image and hurting the success that President Trump has tried to tout in his immigration crackdown since he took office a year ago. So a lot of questions about whether those calls could change, about whether Republican criticism of the administration ramps up. But up to this point, Republicans on Capitol Hill have been pretty loath to criticize President Trump, taking some of those calls, privately. But there are a handful of Republicans who've spoken out and said, they want a fuller investigation. Just the calls are not going a whole lot further than that at this point.
How worried are congressmen and women, because there is a midterm election coming up and the court of public opinion does not look kindly on what's going on in Minnesota and the Trump administration's reaction to it. So are there concerns that this is going to affect those who are up for re-election come November?
Well, certainly there's kind of a looming specter of this, and I'm glad you asked that, Holly, because Democrats, have tried to stay away from the I word for much of the first year of President Trump's presidency. If you can guess what the I word is, it's impeachment. Yet it's something they're talking about more and more, especially given the actions that happened in Minnesota, the concerns, not necessarily with President Trump, but with members of his cabinet like Kristi Noem. And we're hearing more and more Democrats who've, largely for the first year, the calls for impeachment have been fairly isolated, individual Democratic members of Congress calling for impeachment of individual officials, some Democrats in the Senate saying that they, believe that administration officials should resign. But look, this could become effectively a referendum on the future success of the Trump administration if, Democrats kind of make their key argument going into the 2026 midterm elections that if you elect Democrats to Congress, if Democrats win a majority in the House of Representatives and less likely but possible the Senate, that impeachment could really become something that, starts to happen up here as, that Democratic majority looks to a future possible Democratic majority, rather, looks to try and hold Trump administration officials to account. So certainly that specter looming up here on Capitol Hill. A lot of questions about whether lawmakers will go that far.
Straight ahead on Today as It Happened.
Afraid of a hospital bill? Nearly a quarter of working adults are insured but priced out of care. I'm Maura Barrett. Coming up, I'll break down the consequences of being underinsured.
Thanks for staying with us here on Today as It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer, here with your daily look at the day's biggest stories.
In one estimate, nearly a quarter of working-age adults have health insurance that leaves them underinsured. And while that might be a step up from having no insurance at all, experts say the potential risks are the same.
We always see people who avoid the hospital because of costs.
Dr. Anaita Dua, a vascular surgeon and founder of the Medical Community Coalition Healthcare for Action, says she sees more and more patients skip or delay care out of fear they won't be able to afford it.
Patients are concerned that if they come in with their wrist sprained and then they tell the doctor, well, I sprained my wrist by falling down the stairs, the doctor might say, well, did you hit your head? We need a CT scan of your head, which we do. We need to make sure you're not bleeding. But a patient then knows that that's going to be an added cost.
Roughly 9% of working age adults are uninsured, but 23% are underinsured, meaning the coverage they pay for doesn't provide affordable access to care.
They need access to specialty medications and treatments and specialty providers. And so they become underinsured or considered underinsured when they don't have access to those things.
Tiara Green is the president of Accessia Health, a nonprofit that supports people living with rare or chronic health conditions.
As a nonprofit, that's where we step in so that we can close that gap and they can access the care that they need.
Dr. Dua says free clinics can also help, but most of all, she urges patients to never delay care.
The most important thing is your life. Everything can be worked out. Hospitals do eat major costs, so do not delay.
We also asked experts about the expiration of the enhanced tax credits for those who purchase plans on the ACA marketplace. Both experts say they fear more new cases of people going uninsured and underinsured. Green says enrollees with high deductible plans may face higher out-of-pocket costs they can no longer afford.
This is Today's It Happened. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Today As It Happened, Scripps News end-of-day snapshot of our biggest stories. So let's pick up right where we left off.
It's been almost 1 year to the day. Now, 1 year later, we could learn what caused that American Airlines flight and a Black Hawk helicopter to collide over the Potomac. 67 people were killed in Washington, D.C. The NTSB has been holding a hearing today to determine a probable cause. Scripps News Washington correspondent Stephanie Liebergen joins us live from our D.C. newsroom. And Stephanie, you've been monitoring this hearing closely. What have we learned so far?
Hey, Del, good afternoon. There are a multitude of reasons why this plane crash seemed to happen, or at least that's the assessment of the staff that has spent the last year investigating this fatal crash. They have been running through a variety of probable causes, that it's not just one thing, it's not just one person, it is a combination of a lot of different things that led up to this crash. They've been talking about an over-reliance on a process called visual separation. They've been talking about mentioning complacency among the employees in the air traffic control tower. They talked about a supervisor who was on duty too long and had lost some situational awareness on the night of the crash. Talked about radio transmissions being broken up and the helicopter pilots likely missing key parts of the information that the air traffic control tower was trying to communicate to them. They also went into and spent a good amount of time on longstanding concerns with helicopter routes around DCA. So there are specific routes that helicopters are allowed to fly around the Washington, D.C. airspace that is very heavily controlled. But there have been issues with these helicopter routes for years, and those issues have been brought up over and over again, but they haven't been fixed. And part of what this investigation has unveiled is something that, in a way, almost shocked some of the members of the National Transportation Safety Board at how close a helicopter, noting that a helicopter could be just 75 feet away from another aircraft, and that was allowed under these helicopter routes. Take a listen.
How is it that no one, absolutely no one, in the FAA did the work to figure out there was only 75 feet, at best, 75 feet of vertical separation between a helicopter on Route 4 and an airplane landing on runway 33? How is it nobody, until we did this investigation?
That's a great question. And we've asked the same question amongst staff, and that's precisely why we have recommended the assessment of these helicopter routes.
Part of the hearing this morning also included some simulation video showing showing a simulation, a replica of what the captain and the first officer in the airplane would have seen and what the pilots in the helicopter would have been seeing that night as they were flying. Right there, if you saw on the bottom, that helicopter showed up just in the last second of that simulation of what the airplane pilots and captain would have been seeing. I mean, I will say I have an untrained eye, I'm not a pilot, but even just looking at these simulations, it's easy to understand how the view of the other aircraft was blurred, was hard to see because of all of the lights that are on the ground and because of the altitude that these two aircraft were flying at. So this is a really complex investigation. Obviously something that has been going on for the last year. There's been talk about alert systems and what type should be required in the future. We are going to get recommendations voted on later today. That will end this hearing. They'll be voting on a probable cause for this crash. They'll be voting on recommendations. But it's important to note, Del, that even if they approve all the recommendations today, there's no guarantee that any of those are taken. These recommendations aren't binding. And so these NTSB board members have already noted that their work is not done today, that their work starts tomorrow to try to advocate for these recommendations, to try to get them actually implemented by the various agencies, the FAA, the U.S. Army, the Department of Defense, et cetera, all going to be getting some recommendations as part of this investigation.
Stephanie Bear pointing out that members of Congress and also the Pentagon love to fly in and out of Reagan National because it is so close to Washington, D.C. Makes you wonder. Scripps News Washington correspondent Stephanie Liebergen live for us. Stephanie, as always, thanks. The FDA is recalling 80,000 Keurig K-Cups. The pods are labeled McCafe Premium Roast Decaf Coffee. The FDA saying it might contain caffeine. Could be bad if you're sensitive to caffeine in your coffee. 1 in 3 Americans say they get the jitters or negative side effects from caffeine. That is from a Daily Dose survey. Quite a scene in Louisiana. Frigid temperatures and icy roads wreaking havoc on I-20. Several 16-wheelers getting stuck. State police say heavy-duty wreckers were needed to move the trucks out of the way. Other vehicles also having a hard time just staying on the road. Traffic now at a standstill. Even now, police are helping stranded drivers and passengers, even escorting some to safety. Police encouraging people to avoid I-20 in North Louisiana altogether. Consumer confidence in the economy has collapsed, now at its lowest levels in more than a decade. The Conference Board releasing its Consumer Confidence Index a short time ago. A nearly 10-point drop last month, landing at its weakest level since 2014. That was much lower than what some experts were predicting. Consumers citing inflation, prices, tariffs, and geopolitical tensions as their key concerns.
Coming up on Today as It Happened.
The Islamic Republic has a history of executing gay men. It started with the 1979 revolution. The abuse has been around the corner all these years.
You're watching Today as It Happened, Scripps News rundown of the biggest events and stories of the day. So let's get to it.
Overseas, we are just now learning how severe Iran's crackdown on protesters has been. Thousands were massacred by their government, allegedly using military-grade and chemical weapons. The bodies are still being counted as the possibility of American intervention looms. Scripps News national correspondent Alex Miller is live in New York with the latest on this story. And Alex, the president increasing the military presence in that area. An aircraft carrier and several warships have been deployed. How is the regime responding, and is this something that the Iranian people want to see?
This is something that many of the Iranian people want to see, and the regime is responding with taunts of sorts. I want to show you this video that was taken in Tehran at Revolution Square. It's of a billboard of an American warship and several fighter jets in this video. It almost looks like there is blood in the water for Americans, where the American stripes on the flag would be. And they have the line, "If you sow the wind, you reap the whirlwind." I believe we do have that video for you. And it is that phrase, "if you sow the wind, you reap the whirlwind," that is a commonly used official Iranian message that is used during heightened tensions. And we are seeing Iranians come back online now after the regime had a complete blackout. They have seen much of this devastation themselves, though they're obviously finding out what happened in different parts of the region. They've really seen it themselves firsthand, many of them participating in the protests. Everyone knows someone who was killed. I just spoke with somebody who fled Iran in 2021. Listen to what he had to say.
If the US government wants to protect the borders of this nation, which it should, which it must, President Trump has a mandate to do that. I would call on them to go after the Islamic Republic lobbyists, agents of this regime that are posing a national security threat to Americans. The Islamic Republic has a history of executing gay men. It started with the 1979 revolution. The abuse has been around the corner all these years. I have friends who have been arrested, tortured, raped by security officers because they are gay. This is the regime that we are dealing with. I have trust in the US system. I have trust in due process in this country.
And Del, there are other reports of Iranians rebelling against the regime. At points when the internet blackout lifted a little bit, you could see comments on state TV's online pages. People had made accounts and were commenting against the regime on these state news media outlet pages. Again, we think that that might be something that you would typically see on a YouTube video here in the United States, but there, those kinds of things could be punished by death. And from what I've heard from so many different Iranians, they feel like this has really been a watershed moment, a turning point that they are not going back.
Alex, the Arizona Monitor is reporting the Trump administration deported several Iranians, perhaps dozens, on Sunday. 2 men, we're told, were given a temporary reprieve because they were exposed to measles and are now in quarantine. What do we know about the decision, and what could happen to those 2 men if they're actually sent back?
You know, there are so many questions about this because we don't know exactly who was on this plane. The administration has been pretty quiet about it. I reached out to them and we asked them who was on this plane. Were these people associated with the regime, or were these people who had been deported based on their asylum claims? We know that those 2 men that you just mentioned had asylum claims in 2025 that were denied. They are both gay men, and we know that homosexuality is punishable by death in Iran as recently as 2022. But the White House did not give us very much information as to who was on the plane. We just got a message in from them. I want to read you a little bit about what they said. They said that any individuals being deported would have had executable final orders, meaning a federal judge has ordered their removal from the United States. The administration remains committed to using all lawful options to carry out the largest mass deportation operation of illegal criminal aliens in history. So again, we do not know anything about who is on these planes, and we do not know whether the administration is reviewing, Del, the asylum claims of these 2 men. I asked specifically if they will be because of these 2 men being stopped by morality police in the past, and by, of course, knowing that homosexuality is punishable by death in Iran. They did not answer those questions. That's the message they sent us back. But members of Congress are also trying to get involved, reaching out to the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of State. They have not heard back either from what we know at this point.
Or whether the 2 men or the other individuals could be deported to another country. Scripps News national correspondent Alex Miller live for us in New York. Alex, as always, we thank you.
Straight ahead on Today as It Happened.
Is Kristi Noem going to step down?
No. I think she's doing a very good job. I think she's doing a very good job.
Welcome back to Today as It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer. All right, let's jump right back into our rundown of our top stories of the day.
Homeland Security saying ICE agents will be at the Winter Olympics. Those games kicking off in less than 2 weeks on February 6th. A spokesperson saying the agents will be there for security to, quote, vet and mitigate risks from transnational criminal organizations. Current and former Italian lawmakers are urging the Prime Minister to ban those agents. They point to those recent deadly shootings of 2 U.S. citizens in Minneapolis. Their family saying one of those strikes killed their loved ones. 26-year-old Chad Joseph and 41-year-old Rishi Samaru of Trinidad are believed to have been on board one of those boats hit by the military. Their family say They were working in Venezuela and got a ride home. The Trump administration says the boats were carrying illegal drugs. The family say neither man had any connection to drug cartels. Those strikes have killed at least 117 people. The cattle call is over. That is the famous open seating policy that passengers on board Southwest Airlines enjoyed for decades. It ended today. Before today, passengers could pick the seat they wanted, first come, first serve. Now it'll operate just like any other airline. You have to pay for an assigned seat. The low-fare carrier has been making changes to its policies, including ending a customer favorite, those 2 free checked bags. The airline says the changes are needed to broaden their revenue streams. Border Patrol Commander Gregory Bovino is expected to leave Minneapolis as early as today. Last night, demonstrators outside the hotel room where they believe Bovino was staying. They banged those pots and pans to keep people inside that hotel from sleeping. Several dozen protesters were there last night. Scripps News national correspondent Katie Tubman is live on the ground for us in Minneapolis right now. And Katie, Minneapolis state investigators on the scene earlier. What do we know about that?
That's right, Del. They were here on the scene where we're at the site of where Alex Preddy was shot and killed by a Border Patrol agent over the weekend. And right behind me, you'll see that there is a large memorial set up in his honor, as well as many people who have come here to pay their respects. But BCA, the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, was also here earlier today. They were on the scene. They were taking particular looks across the scene. But one thing that we really want to point out is something in particular they were looking at, which I will point to right now, which is on the building right outside actually on the street and of the sidewalk where Preddy was shot and killed. It appears to be a bullet hole, but BCA did not confirm when they had been asked by my colleague Megan Lee earlier today whether it was a bullet hole and whether that was what they were investigating. But BCA also told Scripps News that they are still collecting information. They said that the federal agencies have not shared information with them regarding the investigation into the killing of Alex Preddy. But we are hearing, of course, that this is happening amid calls, growing calls for impartial and as well as independent investigation into Preddy's killing, as well as we're hearing earlier from the President Trump saying, I want to see the investigation. I'm going to be watching over it. I want it to be very honorable and honest investigation, is what he said not too long ago when it came to what we're hearing. We know for sure that the White House said that there are 3 agencies investigating this the shooting, and that there still has been tension between local and federal officers when it comes to this investigation. But when I'm talking to a few folks here about BCA being on the scene, Del, a lot of them say that it's a relief to hear that, considering the tensions between the federal government and between the state officials here in Minneapolis. Del?
Katie, Tom Homan is on the ground in Minnesota. How could that change things?
Well, we're hearing that it hopes for a lot of de-escalation. That's what the Trump administration has said. Turning down the temperature is something that everyone has been calling for and has been for weeks now, until it got to this horrific point. But that's definitely what is the hope. De-escalation of what has been growing for a while now in Minneapolis, in the state of Minnesota. And right now, yes, we're hearing that Bovino, who's been the face of ICE operations here in Minneapolis, is out or should be leaving soon. DHS has not confirmed, as we asked them, when he's leaving and how many federal officers are going with him. But he is expected to be out, and Tom Homan is in. We heard earlier today that from the governor's office, that he and Tim Walz had a meeting, and Governor Walz just reiterated that he wants a investigation that's impartial. He also said he wants a swift and significant reduction in the number of federal officers and forces who are in Minnesota. We also heard from, like I said, locals, people who are in this community who want to see things change, say what this change of leadership means to them. And here's one person that we spoke to had to say about that.
I'm so relieved. I think that just alleviates a lot of just stress and worry on some folks and our friends and our community. But still, we still have to see what's coming in the in the upcoming days.
again, this shakeup in ICE leadership here in Minneapolis is bringing some sense of or hope for de-escalation, and we are here at the scene where the tensions that have been rising for weeks now since this operation began here in Minneapolis and in Minnesota came to a fever pitch over the weekend with the killing of Alex Preddy by a Border Patrol agent. So a lot of hope going forward, but we'll definitely see what's to come in the days ahead, particularly as we hear more about the investigation, where a lot of questions are still surrounding it. Del?
Scripps News national correspondent Katia Tubman for us live on the ground in Minneapolis. Katia, as always, thank you very much.
Well, you know, we're doing a big investigation. I want to see the investigation. I'm going to be watching over it. I want a very honorable and honest investigation. I have to see it myself.
Scripps News White House correspondent Haley Bull joins us now live from the North Lawn. And Haley, yesterday we heard some softening from the White House on its once ironclad immigration crackdown in the Twin Cities. Is the president trying to signal some changes in his cabinet?
Well, the president is publicly maintaining confidence in his cabinet, and today he says things are going well as Border Czar Tom Homan is meeting with leaders in Minnesota today. That includes Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey as well as Governor Tim Walz. The governor's office said during their meeting that Walz reiterated a priority of impartial investigations and reducing the size of the federal force, and that the two agreed on the need for ongoing dialogue. Now, the White House, as you mentioned, tapped Homan to be the point of contact on the ground in Minneapolis amid backlash to the shooting after an initial response to it that included top administration officials linking Alex Preddy to domestic terrorism and calling him an assassin without providing evidence, as we have seen the White House strike a different tone this week. Today, President Trump telling reporters he wants a speedy and honorable investigation and said no when he was asked if he thought Preddy was an assassin. Listen. Now, over the weekend, CBP's Gregory Bovino and Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem appeared publicly in the response before Homan, who carries decades of experience working with law enforcement, was named the point person for cooperating with state and local officials. Now, the White House making clear that they want criminals turned over and assistance from local police in order to lessen this need for CBP to support ICE operations, as at the same time it is doubling down on its focus on undocumented migrants that allege has criminal ties. Now, despite the change in leadership on the ground in a reported 2-hour meeting between the president and Secretary Noem on Monday, as reported first by the New York Times, the president today said Noem was not stepping down and that he thought she was doing a good job. Additionally, Homeland Security has also reiterated that Bovino has not been relieved of his duties, despite a number of media reports calling his future into question. A spokesperson stating he's a, quote, key part of the president's team, Dell.
Scripps News White House correspondent Haley Bull for us live on the North Lawn of the White House. Haley, thank you very much.
Thank you for spending some of your evening with us here on Today As It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer. Have an excellent Tuesday night.